I knew something was wrong before my phone even finished buzzing. The vibration felt violent in my palm, sharp and urgent, like it was trying to warn me instead of ring. When the screen lit up and I saw my disabled sister's name, my stomach dropped hard enough to make me dizzy. Princess never called me in the middle of the day. She never FaceTimed, and she absolutely never cried. But her face filled the screen anyway, pale, shaking, eyes wide with a kind of fear that doesn't come from imagination. She was whispering my name, like saying it too loud would make things worse. Her hands trembled so badly the camera kept tilting away from her face. Then she said 4 words that rewired my entire nervous system. Before we move forward, drop a comment. Where are you watching from? Please come home now. The call cut to the driveway behind her, and that was when my chest tightened so fast it felt like I couldn't breathe. 2 men stood over her wheelchair, both wearing black tactical vests with bold white lettering that read, HOA Security. One of them had his hand wrapped around the handles of her chair, not pushing, not helping, just holding her in place like an object that could be moved whenever he felt like it. The other leaned down close enough that I could see the veins in his neck through the screen, his mouth moving fast, angry, inches from her face. Princess wasn't screaming. She wasn't fighting. She was frozen. Her shoulders were hunched forward, her hands pulled in tight to her chest, her whole body bracing like she already knew pain was coming. I didn't hear everything he said, but I didn't need to. I recognized that tone. It's the sound of someone who thinks they're untouchable. I don't remember hanging up. I don't remember grabbing my keys. I just remember the engine screaming when I slammed the accelerator and the way my vision tunneled so tight that the road felt unreal. Every red light looked like an insult. Every car in front of me felt like an obstacle I might drive through if it didn't move fast enough. My hands were locked, white knuckle on the steering wheel. My jaw clenched so hard it hurt. I kept seeing her face, the way her eyes darted to the side like she was tracking movements she couldn't escape from. The distance between us felt unbearable. 10 minutes became an eternity. Every second stretched thin and sharp. When I turned onto our street, I didn't slow down. I couldn't. And that's when the image on my phone turned into reality. 2 grown men in black vests towering over my little sister in our own driveway. Her face streaked with tears, one cheek already red, swelling in a way that made my blood go cold. She wasn't resisting. She wasn't even speaking. She sat there shaking, trying to protect her face with her hands like a child who knows hitting back will only make it worse. Something cracked open inside my chest so violently, I actually staggered when I stepped out of the car. It wasn't anger at first. It was something darker, something protective and feral, and completely uninterested in rules. One of them noticed me and turned slowly, like he was bored. He looked me up and down with a smirk that told me he'd already decided how this was going to go. Then he said the sentence that burned itself into my memory. "This is HOA business," he said calmly. "Back off, civilian." The way he said civilian wasn't loud or dramatic. It was dismissive, like I was irrelevant, like my presence didn't matter. I stepped forward without thinking, my voice low enough that it didn't shake. "You should have checked who her brothers are." They laughed, both of them. Not loud, not nervous. Just a quick shared chuckle between men who thought they were safe. They didn't know what was coming down the street behind me. They didn't know I wasn't alone. They didn't know the balance of power had already shifted. My twin brothers were seconds away. Princess whispered my name again, barely audible. "Please," she said, her voice cracking. "Don't let them touch me again." The word again landed like a punch to the throat. I took another step forward, and this time the bigger one raised his hand and pointed 2 fingers at my chest like I was a piece of trash on the sidewalk. "Sir, step back," he barked. "This is official HOA enforcement." He said it with confidence, with authority, with the kind of certainty that only comes from believing someone else will clean up your mess. "You touched her," I said. His smile didn't fade. "We're authorized to use force if residents don't comply." That was the moment it became something else entirely. Not harassment, not intimidation. A crime unfolding in real time. "No," I said, stepping closer, close enough that I could smell his breath. "You're not authorized to touch her. You're not cops. You're criminals." The thinner one shifted beside him, and I saw his hand move. Slow, deliberate. He reached for the pistol on his hip like he'd done it 1,000 times before. Not a warning, not a bluff. He drew it and pointed it straight at my sister. Princess gasped and froze. Her hands flew to her chest, fingers trembling, eyes wide and empty. Time stopped. Sound dropped away. Everything inside me went eerily quiet, and then tires screamed. A black truck slid into the street so hard it rocked on its suspension. The doors flew open before the engine even cut. My brothers were there. Elias, calm and precise, eyes already assessing angles and threats. Caleb, loud, explosive, already moving before his feet hit the ground. Both Navy SEALs. Both done being polite. Elias didn't shout. He didn't need to. He raised his pistol with one steady hand and spoke 5 words that sucked all the air out of the street. "Drop the gun now, slowly." The fake cop swung toward him. It was the worst decision of his life. Caleb crossed the yard in 3 long strides and hit him like a truck. He grabbed the man's wrist, twisted hard, and slammed his face into the driveway with a sound that made my teeth ache. The gun flew out of his hand and skidded into the grass. The man screamed as Caleb's knee came down on his spine, pinning him like he weighed nothing. The other fake cop panicked. His confidence evaporated instantly. He pulled his own weapon, hands shaking so badly he could barely aim. Princess screamed. I lunged forward. Elias moved faster than gravity. He didn't fire. He stepped in, chopped the man's wrist with surgical precision, and sent the weapon skittering across the pavement. Before the man could even register pain, Elias hooked his leg and dumped him hard onto the concrete. Both fake cops were down in seconds. One wheezing and clutching his ribs, the other trembling with his cheek grinding into the driveway. Caleb hauled the thinner one up by his collar and slammed him back down. "You laid hands on a woman in a wheelchair," he growled. "You pointed a gun at her. Who sent you?" The man whimpered. Caleb pressed his knee harder. "Answer." Elias turned to the other one, his voice flat and deadly calm. "And don't lie. I'll know." The bigger one broke. "HOA Karen," he sobbed. "She hired us. She said the girl was a problem. She said scare her." The name burned through me like acid. The same woman who had hated Princess from the first day. The same woman who had complained about her ramp, her van, her medical deliveries. Princess clutched my shirt and cried into my chest. My brothers stood over the men like executioners waiting for permission. This wasn't an HOA issue anymore. This was war. Before that driveway ever became a crime scene, before black vests and drawn guns, there was a neighborhood that sold obedience as peace. We moved into Briarwood Ridge because it promised quiet, stability, and safety. That's how they hook you. Trimmed hedges, identical mailboxes, polite waves that never reached the eyes. It looked like order. It felt like control, the kind that doesn't announce itself until you're already boxed in by rules you didn't write and power you didn't vote for. From day one, the HOA sat above everything like an invisible ceiling, and at the center of it stood HOA Karen. Princess didn't choose to live carefully. She chose to live fully. Her disability never softened her personality or slowed her mind. She cracked jokes faster than most people could follow, noticed details others missed, and refused to shrink herself just to make strangers comfortable. The wheelchair wasn't a weakness to her. It was a tool. The ramp wasn't an eyesore. It was access. The van wasn't clutter. It was freedom. But HOA Karen didn't see any of that. She saw disruption. She saw difference. And difference, to someone like her, was an insult. The first violation notice arrived less than 2 weeks after we moved in. It cited the ramp, too visible, not uniform with neighborhood aesthetics. I laughed when I read it because it felt ridiculous. Then the second notice came, this time about the van, too large, too industrial. Then came the comments about medical supply deliveries, boxes left on the porch for too long, visual clutter, neighborhood harmony. The words were always polite, carefully chosen, sanitized. But the intent was sharp. Each letter was a reminder that we were being watched. I tried to handle it the right way. I attended meetings. I spoke calmly. I brought documentation. I explained her condition without oversharing, without begging, without apologizing for her existence. HOA Karen listened with a smile that never moved. She nodded like she understood while her eyes stayed cold and calculating. When I asked for reasonable accommodation, she leaned back in her chair and said the HOA decides what's appropriate here. Not the law, not common sense. The HOA, her HOA. Princess noticed the shift before I did. She felt the eyes on her when she rolled down the driveway. She felt the pauses when neighbors stopped waving and started staring. The silence that followed her movements. The way conversations stopped when she passed. Karen had a talent for spreading discomfort without ever raising her voice. She didn't need to threaten. She let the rules do it for her. And when rules weren't enough, she escalated quietly. That's when the patrols started. At first, they looked almost official. 2 men walking slowly, radios clipped to their shoulders, black vests labeled HOA security, like they were guarding something valuable instead of a cul-de-sac. They didn't introduce themselves. They didn't explain their presence. They just appeared. They walked past our house more than any other, stopped longer, watched Princess when she watered her plants, when she loaded into the van, when she existed in ways HOA Karen clearly resented. Princess tried to brush it off. She joked about it at first, called them wannabe mall cops, rolled her eyes and kept going. But jokes dry up fast when fear moves in. She started timing her outings, started texting me before she went outside, started keeping her phone in her lap, screen unlocked, just in case. That was when I realized this wasn't about compliance anymore. It was about pressure, about making life uncomfortable enough that we'd either fall in line or leave. I reported the patrols. I asked for credentials. I asked why armed men were watching a disabled resident. HOA Karen told me they were there for safety. She said crime prevention required visibility. She said if we had nothing to hide, there shouldn't be a problem. That's when I understood exactly who I was dealing with. Someone who wraps intimidation in language that sounds reasonable until you're the one being suffocated by it. Authority, when unchecked, doesn't roar. It whispers. It smiles. It documents. It waits. HOA Karen didn't wake up one morning and decide to destroy us. She tested boundaries first. She nudged. She prodded. She watched how much she could get away with. And every time she wasn't challenged, she pushed further. The ramp complaints became patrols. The patrols became confrontations. And the confrontations were always aimed at the same target. Princess. Because she was visible. Because she was vulnerable. Because HOA Karen thought no one would hit back hard enough to matter. By the time the fake cops stepped into our driveway, this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a campaign, a deliberate use of authority to isolate, intimidate, and control someone HOA Karen saw as a problem to be solved. She never expected resistance. She never expected consequences. And she definitely never expected the kind of response that was already moving toward her, fast, silent, and unstoppable. HOA Karen never had to touch my sister herself. That was the genius of it, if you want to call cruelty strategic. She understood how to turn distance into insulation and authority into a weapon that never left fingerprints. Every move she made was framed as policy, every escalation buried under the language of compliance and safety, every threat disguised as procedure. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't send angry emails. She let the structure do the damage for her, because structures don't feel guilt, and they don't hesitate. The HOA was built like a ladder, and HOA Karen stood at the top rung where no one could easily reach her. Beneath her were committees, volunteers, contractors, and hired enforcers, each one given just enough authority to act without enough responsibility to question orders. It created a perfect fog. If something went wrong, blame dissolved before it ever reached her. She wasn't harassing a disabled resident. She was enforcing standards. She wasn't targeting my sister, she was maintaining harmony. That language mattered because it gave people permission to look away. The fake HOA cops were the final extension of that system. They weren't random thugs. They were hired with intent. Their uniforms were designed to intimidate without triggering immediate suspicion. Black vests, radios, authoritative posture. Just official enough to scare, just unofficial enough to deny accountability. They didn't knock. They didn't introduce themselves. They positioned their bodies in ways that blocked exits and controlled space. They understood dominance, and they understood who HOA Karen wanted dominated. Princess became a routine on their schedule. Noon watering, afternoon van loading, evening return. They watched her movements like data points, learning her patterns, learning when she was alone. They stood too close, asked unnecessary questions, commented on violations that didn't exist. They never touched her at first. Touching would have been too obvious. Instead, they leaned in, invaded her personal space, forced her to look up at them while they looked down. Power doesn't always strike immediately. Sometimes it just hovers until you can't breathe. I noticed the way neighbors reacted too. doors closing faster, curtains shifting, people who once waved suddenly busy with their phones. HOA Karen had done that as well. She didn't need to instruct anyone directly. All she had to do was label us difficult, non-compliant, a problem household. In HOA culture, that's enough to isolate you. No one wants to be next. Silence becomes self-preservation. When I confronted HOA Karen about the men, she didn't deny hiring security. She reframed it. She said incidents had been reported. She said concerns had been raised. She said the neighborhood demanded action. She spoke in passive constructions that erased responsibility while justifying aggression. Princess wasn't being watched. She was being monitored. She wasn't being harassed. She was being reminded of regulations. And every time I pushed back, HOA Karen leaned further into policy, knowing most people don't have the energy to fight paperwork indefinitely. The abuse escalated because it was allowed to, because every step was small enough to excuse. First the notices, then the patrols, then the confrontations. Each layer normalized the next. By the time the fake cops put hands on my sister's wheelchair, the structure had already trained them to believe they were untouchable. They weren't improvising. They were executing what the system encouraged. Apply pressure, force compliance, break resistance quietly. Princess felt it long before it became physical. She started hesitating before going outside, started checking the street before rolling down the ramp, started asking me if she was doing something wrong just by being seen. That question hit harder than anything else, because that's what HOA Karen wanted. Not obedience, erasure. To make my sister feel like her existence was a violation. The power structure didn't just fail my sister, it was designed to. HOAs don't reward empathy. They reward conformity. And when someone can't conform, when their life doesn't fit the template, the system doesn't adapt. It attacks. HOA Karen knew that. She exploited it. She hid behind bylaws while pushing things further than she ever could have in the open. And she believed, with absolute certainty, that no one would stop her before real harm was done. By the time that Thursday afternoon arrived, the system was fully engaged. The patrols weren't a warning anymore. They were an action phase. The structure had moved from surveillance to enforcement, from intimidation to violence. And HOA Karen was sitting comfortably above it all, convinced that if things went too far, the damage would land on someone else. She never considered that the system she built could collapse in seconds. She never imagined the abuse she authorized would be exposed in public, and she never realized that the very power she relied on was about to turn against her. The moment my tires screamed onto our street, the last layer of doubt burned away. Whatever excuses HOA Karen had wrapped this situation in, whatever polite language she used to keep her hands clean, none of it mattered anymore. What was happening in my driveway was not subjective. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't policy enforcement. It was abuse in plain sight, unfolding in real time, with witnesses whether anyone wanted to admit it or not. Seeing it with my own eyes changed everything. The way one of those men gripped the handles of Princess's wheelchair wasn't casual or accidental. His fingers were locked tight, knuckles white, controlling her position like she was luggage instead of a human being. The other one leaned in close enough that his shadow swallowed her face, shouting down at her while she shrank into herself. There was no clipboard, no citation, no explanation, just dominance, just pressure, just the unspoken message that resistance would only make it worse. Princess's injuries were already there before I even stepped fully into the driveway. The red mark on her cheek wasn't dramatic, but it didn't need to be. It was proof. It was the physical receipt of everything she'd been enduring quietly. She wasn't crying loudly. She wasn't flailing or begging. She was doing what people do when they've learned that making noise invites punishment. That alone told me how far this had already gone before I arrived. Every word the fake cops spoke after that only tightened the case against them. They didn't ask questions. They issued commands. They didn't explain authority. They assumed it. When I challenged them, they didn't clarify their role or show credentials. They doubled down. That's how you know someone is bluffing. Real authority doesn't panic when questioned. Fake authority gets louder, more aggressive, more willing to cross lines. The moment they claimed the right to use force, The situation crossed from harassment into criminal territory. That wasn't interpretation. That wasn't emotion. That was law. And when the thinner one reached for his weapon, any remaining ambiguity evaporated. There is no policy, no HOA rule, no neighborhood bylaw on earth that allows an armed response against a disabled resident watering her plants. None. That single action collapsed every defense HOA Karen could ever attempt to build. Princess's reaction in that moment became evidence too. She didn't scream for help, like someone staging a scene. She froze, like someone who had learned through experience that sudden movements invite violence. Her hands went to her chest, her eyes locked forward, her body rigid with terror. That kind of response isn't learned in minutes. It's conditioned. It told a story no paperwork ever could. When my brothers arrived, the situation didn't escalate. It clarified. Their presence forced everything into the open. The fake cops' confidence shattered instantly, because for the first time, they were being confronted by people who didn't accept their performance. Elias didn't need to shout or threaten. His calm alone exposed the imbalance. Caleb's speed stripped away any illusion of control. Within seconds, the men who had been so comfortable towering over my sister were on the ground, disarmed, exposed, and suddenly very aware of how far they had overstepped. The confession didn't come out of nowhere. It was dragged out by pressure, by fear, by the realization that there was no safe exit left. When the name HOA Karen spilled out of that man's mouth, it connected every loose thread in an instant. The patrols, the violations, the intimidation, the escalation, it all pointed back to the same source. This wasn't rogue behavior, it was outsourced violence, ordered, directed, approved. Proof piled up fast after that. Fake badges that couldn't pass a glance, illegally carried firearms, written instructions that spelled out intent instead of safety, a document that labeled my sister as a compliance target, like she was a malfunctioning appliance instead of a person. Each piece stripped away deniability. Each item tightened the noose around HOA Karen's authority. There was no spinning it now, no reframing, no polite explanation that could erase what had been found on that driveway. By the time real police sirens cut through the neighborhood, the truth was already standing in the open. Neighbors who had looked away before were watching now. Curtains shifted, phones came out. The abuse that had thrived in silence was suddenly public, and that visibility mattered. It meant this couldn't be buried in committee meetings or softened by legal language. What happened to Princess was documented, witnessed, and undeniable. This section wasn't about revenge. It was about exposure, about dragging something that thrived in shadows into full daylight. HOA Karen's power depended on distance, on plausible deniability, on the belief that no one would ever connect the dots loudly enough to matter. Standing there in our driveway, with proof stacking up around her hired enforcers, that belief finally collapsed. And once the truth was visible, there was no putting it back where it belonged. The confrontation didn't end when the fake cops hit the concrete. That was only the moment the lie lost its balance. Everything after that was the slow, humiliating collapse of a system that had relied on intimidation and silence to survive. The street felt different once those men were disarmed. The air itself seemed to shift, like the neighborhood finally realized what had been hiding in plain sight. Caleb kept his knee planted on the thinner man's spine, not out of rage, but out of certainty. He knew exactly how much pressure to apply, and exactly when to ease it, controlling the situation the same way he controlled everything else, deliberately and without panic. The man beneath him cried and begged, his earlier confidence leaking out of him with every shallow breath. The other fake cop lay a few feet away, curled in on himself, wheezing like the strength had been punched straight out of his lungs. Elias stood between them and Princess, not touching her, not crowding her, just positioning his body so no one could get close without going through him first. That detail mattered. For the first time since this ordeal began, my sister wasn't being hovered over or blocked in. She had space. She had visibility. She had control of her own breathing again. Her eyes never left the men on the ground, not with hatred, but with a kind of stunned disbelief that the power dynamic had flipped so completely. Neighbors began to emerge slowly, cautiously, like people testing whether it was finally safe to look. Garage doors paused halfway up, front doors cracked open, Phones were raised and held steady. The same people who had avoided eye contact with Princess for weeks were suddenly very interested in what was happening in our driveway. That attention burned hotter than any punch ever could. This wasn't private anymore. This was public exposure. When the real police sirens finally cut through the tension, they didn't feel intrusive. They felt inevitable. Red and blue lights washed over the street, reflecting off windshields and polished siding, turning the neighborhood into a stage no one could pretend not to see. 2 cruisers pulled in and stopped with controlled precision. The officer stepped out calmly, hands relaxed but ready, eyes already reading the scene with trained efficiency. They didn't ask dramatic questions. They didn't shout. The lead officer took in the details in silence first. The guns on the ground, the bruising on Princess's face, the way Caleb's knee was positioned, the lack of any real insignia on the men's vests. Then he looked at me and said one word: explain. I didn't embellish. I didn't editorialize. I pointed. One man hit my sister. The other aimed a gun at her. They claimed HOA authority. Elias added the part they couldn't deny. They confessed who sent them. The officer's demeanor changed instantly. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. It wasn't a neighborhood dispute. It was felony territory, and they treated it that way. The fake cops were rolled, searched, and exposed piece by piece. Fake badges that wouldn't fool a rookie. Firearms carried illegally. Zip ties tucked into pockets. Written instructions spelling out intent without shame. And then the page that made one of the officers pause longer than the rest. A printed label. Compliance target, Princess. That was when the neighborhood truly understood. Murmurs spread. Someone swore under their breath. Someone else gasped. Princess lowered her head, not in shame, but in exhaustion. She had known she was being targeted. Seeing it written down only confirmed what her body had already learned. The officer folded the document carefully, like it deserved respect as evidence, and gave a single nod. The fake cops were handcuffed without ceremony. They didn't resist. There was nothing left to perform. 10 minutes later, the final act arrived. A pearl-white SUV rolled into the street like it owned the place, slow and deliberate, stopping just far enough away to be noticed. HOA Karen stepped out with perfect posture and practiced confidence, heels clicking sharply against the pavement. She didn't assess the situation. She assumed it would bend to her. She marched forward and demanded the men be released, her voice sharp, indignant, offended that her authority had been challenged at all. Princess flinched at the sound of her voice. That reaction didn't go unnoticed. Caleb laughed once, low and dangerous, the sound of someone who knew exactly how this was about to end. The officer raised a hand and told HOA Karen to step back. She refused. She insisted she had granted enforcement authority. Elias corrected her without raising his voice. He said she had authorized terror. That word landed hard. Terror. It reframed everything instantly. HOA. Karen's eyes flicked to Princess's bruised cheek, then to the officers, then to the crowd that had gathered. The certainty she walked in with evaporated in real time. The lead officer opened a folder and spoke calmly, professionally, without emotion. Written evidence, conspiracy, assault of a disabled resident, impersonation, kidnapping intent, each charge stacked on the next like bricks. By the time he reached for the cuffs, HOA Karen's face had gone pale. When the metal closed around her wrists, the neighborhood went quiet. Not shocked quiet, satisfied quiet. The kind that follows the end of a long lie. HOA Karen tried to shout that it wasn't over. Her voice cracked halfway through the sentence. No one argued. No one rushed to defend her. The power she had relied on for so long didn't protect her anymore. It abandoned her the moment it stopped being useful. As she was led to the cruiser, Princess finally exhaled, a soft, trembling breath that felt like the first real one she'd taken in weeks. The confrontation was over, but the collapse was complete. HOA, Karen's authority didn't end in a dramatic explosion. It ended in silence, cuffs, and the slow realization that everyone had seen exactly who she was. Once the cuffs closed around HOA Karen's wrists, the situation stopped belonging to her entirely. Control shifted the way it always does when real authority takes over, quietly and without theatrics. The officers didn't celebrate. They didn't gloat. They moved with practiced efficiency, separating emotion from procedure, because that's how consequences are made permanent. What HOA Karen had relied on for years, intimidation wrapped in politeness, had no power here. The lead officer began issuing instructions, and everyone followed them without argument. The fake cops were lifted to their feet, searched again, and escorted toward the cruisers. Their earlier bravado was gone, replaced by the hollow stare of men realizing they had been used and discarded by someone who would never protect them. Blood marked the driveway in places where confidence had once stood. No one rushed to help them, not out of cruelty, but because accountability doesn't come with comfort. Princess stayed close to me, her fingers wrapped tightly around my sleeve. She wasn't shaking anymore. Her body language had changed in subtle but unmistakable ways. Her shoulders were no longer hunched forward. Her breathing had slowed. She was watching everything with clear eyes, absorbing the moment not as a victim but as a witness. That shift mattered. It meant something inside her had realigned. Fear was being replaced by certainty. The officers photographed everything. The bruises on Princess's face, the marks on her wheelchair where hands had gripped too tightly, the weapons, the paperwork. Each click of the camera was another nail sealing this shut. HOA Karen couldn't charm her way out of photographs. She couldn't talk policy over documented injuries. Facts don't bend, they stack. And the stack against her was growing fast. One officer spoke directly to Princess, kneeling slightly so they were at eye level. His tone was calm, respectful, careful. He explained what would happen next, what charges meant, what protections were in place. He didn't rush her. He didn't minimize what she'd been through. That alone felt like retaliation of a different kind. Not violence, not dominance. Respect. The kind HOA Karen had denied her from the start. My brothers stepped back deliberately. They didn't hover. They didn't interfere. Their role was finished, and they knew it. Elias holstered his weapon fully and moved his hands into plain sight. Caleb wiped his palms on his jeans like touching the fake cop had left something he wanted gone. Their restraint was intentional. It drew a clean line between intervention and justice, between stopping harm and letting the system finish the job. HOA Karen tried one last time to speak. Her voice was thinner now, stripped of authority and edge. She complained about misunderstandings, about overreactions, about intent. The officer cut her off without raising his voice. Intent doesn't erase impact. He said it like he'd said it 100 times before. Because people like HOA Karen always think intent will save them. It never does. The paperwork came out. Statements were taken. Timelines were confirmed. Every escalation HOA Karen had orchestrated was traced backward through records, emails, orders, and payments. The structure she had hidden behind became a map, leading straight to her. Expert retaliation doesn't look like revenge. It looks like methodical dismantling, like professionals doing their jobs thoroughly enough that nothing grows back. Princess watched as HOA Karen was placed in the cruiser. There was no triumph in her expression, no satisfaction, just a quiet understanding that something had ended. The power that had pressed down on her for months was gone, not because someone yelled louder, but because it had been exposed and removed with precision. That kind of justice doesn't shout, it settles. As the cruisers pulled away, the street felt different again, lighter, not healed, but no longer under threat. The experts had done what they were trained to do. They took a situation built on abuse of authority and returned it to balance without emotion, without hesitation, without mercy for manipulation. HOA Karen wasn't defeated by force. She was neutralized by process. And there is nothing more final to someone like her than that. When the last cruiser disappeared at the end of the street, nothing rushed in to replace the noise it took with it. No cheers, no applause, no speeches about justice or resilience. Just a quiet that settled over the neighborhood like a held breath finally released. The kind of quiet that only comes after something poisonous has been removed. The kind that doesn't celebrate because it doesn't need to. Princess wheeled forward on her own. No one guided her. No one steadied the chair. She moved with intention, stopping between the three of us like she had always belonged there, like she was reclaiming space that had been taken piece by piece. She reached out and touched each of our hands. Not squeezing, not clinging, just confirming we were real and still there. Her eyes weren't wet anymore. They were clear, calm, grounded. "You saved me," she said softly, almost embarrassed by the words. Elias knelt beside her without ceremony and shook his head. He didn't smile. He didn't posture. "We protected our own," he said. Caleb ruffled her hair once, gentle in a way most people would never expect from him, and added that we would keep doing that. There was no promise of vengeance in his voice, just certainty. Around us, neighbors lingered at a distance. Some looked ashamed, some looked relieved. A few looked like they were doing math in their heads, reassessing how much power they had assumed HOA Karen actually held. No one approached, no one apologized. And that was fine. This moment wasn't for them. Their silence was enough. It meant they understood the shift. The driveway looked ordinary again. The guns were gone. The fake badges were gone. The blood had been cleaned. What remained were faint scuff marks on concrete, and the memory of how quickly control can collapse when exposed. Princess rolled back toward the house, unbothered by who was watching now. The ramp wasn't an eyesore anymore. It was just a ramp. The van wasn't a violation. It was just a vehicle. Everything HOA Karen had tried to turn into a problem reverted to what it had always been: normal, necessary, untouchable. Inside, the house felt warmer, safer, not because anything physical had changed, but because the threat was gone. The pressure that had sat on Princess's chest had lifted without fanfare. She moved through the living room like someone relearning their own weight. No flinching, no checking windows, no rehearsed exits, just movement, just presence. Outside, HOA Karen's power evaporated the way it had always existed, quietly, bureaucratically, permanently. Her name would be spoken in lower voices now, if at all. Her authority reduced to case numbers and court dates. The system she had leaned on didn't protect her. It processed her, and that difference mattered more than any dramatic ending ever could. There was no lesson delivered, no moral stamped at the end. Life didn't become inspirational. It became still, predictable, safe enough to breathe in again. Princess settled into her chair by the window as the sun dipped low, painting the street in soft gold that didn't feel threatening anymore. The neighborhood resumed its routine without her fear baked into it. HOA Karen didn't win. She didn't negotiate. She didn't redefine the narrative. She was removed, and when she was gone, no one missed her voice. HOA. A Karen went silent.